Okay, guys, so you should kind of be able, like, there's kind of a shadow though, but we might just have to work with it because it's all I can do. Okay, all right, so the first thing we're going to be looking at is our first study guide, and I didn't have the one that I, on the computer or whatever, so I drew it out on the paper. The first question is asking us on this study guide 1.3, we're talking about the setting. Okay, like that's the big question here is setting is what we're discussing. So it says, when does the telltale heart, telltale heart, take place? Well, let's look at our story and just see when it takes place, okay? So I'm going to hold it and get a little bit closer so you guys can see. So if you look in red, I took where my story is because I've got this big giant book of Edgar Allan Poe, and it's got thousands of pages in it. And so I'm on Telltale Heart, and if you look down here, we can see where it kind of gives us a hint of when the story takes place. So it says in red, we've got the word for a whole week. It says, I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. So we know that there was a week in there. We know that it was at midnight most nights. Even though he does go, it says later he goes into his chamber in the morning and talks to him. And it says, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night just as midnight. And then if we look later on, it says upon the 8th night. Okay, so we know, and I'll put this back up here so you can see me filling in my study guide. We know that the story, let me get a different pen because that's not going to show up good. We know that the story takes place over an 8-day period of time. I hope you guys love the story as much as I do. And it's at or near, it told us, midnight, because he's sneaking in every night to watch the old man sleep, okay? Now, Edgar Allan Poe lived in the 1800s. Now, keep in mind, because sometimes my kids get confused, Edgar Allan Poe just wrote the story. He did not murder an old man in his sleep, okay? This is just a made-up story that he wrote. So his story, his narrator, it says that when he wrote this story, he lived from 1809 to 1849, right? So the story had to have been written somewhere in the 1800s. So we can say that the setting also, the time period would have been a long time ago, okay? Time period around the 1800s. So we know there wouldn't have been electricity. He's using the lantern, so that gives us a hint that there was no electricity. And the language also hints that it was from a long time ago. So now let's talk about the where. Okay, I'm trying to make this work. Okay, so where does the story take place? Well, just from the opening of the story, it says the narrator starts telling us about how he and I'm gonna pull this over here. The narrator starts off by telling us about how he we get down here to this paragraph. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Da 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 da. And then it says he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. And then it goes on and on. It says, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. So we can infer that the story is taking place. Let's see if you can make sure. Okay, the story is going to be taking place at the home of an elderly man, because he says old man. Okay, and now we don't know who the narrator is. We don't know if it's a girl or a boy. We have a tendency to always kind of imagine it as a boy, but we don't know. And he must be his The narrator must be kind of his caretaker. Maybe it's a maid, maybe it's a nurse, maybe it's a son or a daughter, maybe it's it could be a butler, it could be anything like that. We don't know. That's one of the things that makes the story so cool, is that there's this air of mystery in there and we don't really know what's going on. So we know that only him, the old man, and narrator live there. And we know that it's kind of dark because they talk about how the shutters are closed. It says later on that when he's trying to, if you look at the story, it says right here, but no, his room was black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. So we also have the idea of this old man, maybe he's a little paranoid because he's got his shutters locked because he's scared of robbers and stuff. So the room is kind of dark and it gives that good kind of creepy feel to it. But there's also a neighbor that lives close enough to be able to hear the scream right before the murder takes place, okay? All right, so now I'm going to move this up, and I bet I'm going to knock it down. I hope I don't, but I think I'm going to. Ooh, this isn't working. Maybe it is. No, it's not. I'm trying to get. Okay, maybe that'll work. It might fall in the middle of me writing. I don't know, guys. Okay, the last part. How does the setting affect the characterization, theme, and mood of the story? Okay, so we've got our setting. It's creepy, it's dark, it's scary. It's this old house with this old man who's got this creepy eye that freaks this guy out. Our narrator is nuts, right? Because he's wanting to kill this old man just because he or she is wanting to kill the old man just because he has a gross looking eye. I mean, talk about crazy, right? So, the fact that we don't know if it's a boy or a girl, and that all we really know is that he or she takes care of the old man, it kind of lets us, there's this mystery. Everything's falling. It's happening. It's happening. Wait, I got it. I caught it. Hallelujah. If I can get through this. Okay. And tomorrow I'll figure a better way to rig this up. So there's this air of mystery to the story, okay? And having that mystery leaves the reader with lots, don't you eat that pen, lots of questions, right? We don't really know what's going on. Is the narrator female or male? Was the narrator related to the old man? Is this the question also about the setting? The narrator is telling us this story, right? He or she, I'm just going to say he because it's easier. But the narrator starts off by telling us to sit and listen to how calmly he can tell us the whole story. So the narrator is telling us the story, but where? Where is he telling us this story from? Is the narrator in an insane asylum? Is he still in the house? Is the narrator in jail because he's arrested at the end? We don't know where it happens, okay? So it gives this mood, this creepy mood. The mood is creepy and definitely mysterious, right? And it adds, for the characterization, it makes the characters feel more mysterious as well. And then when we think about our themes, this narrator is struggling in his head about what's the right thing to do because he doesn't want to kill the old man because he doesn't hate him, but that eye's driving him crazy. So there's this idea of sanity, which is being not crazy, sanity versus reality, sanity versus, my bad, insanity, right? Is he crazy? Is he not crazy? We don't know. Narrator keeps telling us he's not crazy. He says, I'm not crazy. Look how crazy I'm not. Watch how good I can kill this man. I mean, he's nuts as far as we know. And then the idea of good versus evil as well, because he wants to do the right thing and not kill him, but he can't help it because he's crazy, so he ends up doing this evil thing, right? All right, I'm going to stop this video and then we'll move to the next page, okay? I hope that wasn't too confusing for you guys. But let's look at this first paragraph. It says, true nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am but why will you say that I am mad? All right, so he's starting off telling us that he's not crazy. Listen to how cool I can tell this story. So we'll get into that a little bit more, okay? Okay, guys, so the next thing we're going to look at is the plot diagram, okay? So which basically summarizes the main events of the story. So we start off with our exposition as usual, where you learn about the setting and the characters and all that stuff, and you learn about kind of the conflict. And then we have our rise in action over here that builds up to our climax, which is the most exciting point of the story, the biggest action, the turning point where the story starts to change. And we have our fall in action right here, which kind of ties up all our loose ends. And then we have the final ending, okay? So I didn't want this video to be as long as the last one because, oh my God, that took forever. So what I did was I wrote all the little events on pieces of paper over here. And then we're going to kind of fill them in where they go on the chart. So let's look at them together, okay? So let's go ahead and start off with our exposition. I'm going to grab my exposition, and I'm going to go ahead and just tell you what, well, let's look through these and see what we can find. Let's start off with one that we hear. Okay, the narrator hears the heartbeat grow louder and louder again. So the word again is going to be that second time he heard the heartbeat, not the first time. So that's got to be somewhere here after he killed him. So I'm going to put it over here in my file in action, but I don't know which order it goes in yet, okay? All right. Then I'm going to go over here. Let's see. N stands for narrator, okay? So the narrator watches the old man for 7 nights. Well, that kind of built up, right? So let's put it over here in our rise in action somewhere. So that helped build that suspense, that night after night after night. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, is he going to do it tonight, tonight? And then finally, we know he finally does it. It says the narrator screams and runs into the room and jumps on the old man. Well, that sounds like a big action. So it could be climax or it could be rise in action. So I'm just going to stick it right there for now. The narrator confesses to the police. Well, that's how everything ends up, right? That's the very end at the end when he says, villains, I admit the deed. Ah! So I'm going to put that over here on my resolution because I know that's the resolution. Tear up the boards. Here's the beating of his hideous heart, right? All right. Then we have the narrator checks on him in the morning like everything's fine. All right. So that'd be over here somewhere. Narrator watches the old man 7 nights. Yeah. He goes into him in the morning, so that's probably right there. All right, the narrator decides to kill the old man. That's one of the first things. He has to do that first before anything else. So that could be exposition or it could be the first rise in action event. I'm going to put it right here until we know. The narrator pulls the bed over the old man and kills him. So the killing him, that part where he finally kills him, that's going to be the biggest action, the most exciting part of the story where everything starts to turn around. So that's going to be my climax, okay? So I'm going to put that right there. So that means this right before he does it when he screams and jumps on him is going to be that last rise in action event. The 8th night, the old man wakes up, okay? So that's the rise in action over here somewhere, right? So I'm going to set that right there. Let's see. The narrator cuts up the body and hides it under the floorboards. That's going to be my file in action. That's going to be after he kills him, before he hears the heartbeat again. So let's put that right there. The police show up to search the house. So they showed up before he heard the heartbeat because it was when they were questioning him and he thought he was so cool and had it all under control. Then he started getting nervous and he started hearing boom, 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 boom. That's supposed to be a heartbeat. I have ink all over my hand. All right. We have an old house with an old man, and the narrator begins his story. That's going to be our what? I hate that y'all aren't here for me to talk about this with you, but anyway, that's going to be our exposition, okay? That's where we learn about the story and what's happening. We got our characters and we got our setting. And then we got this right here. The narrator hears the sound of a heartbeat grow louder and louder. So that would be over here. So it looks like we've got all of our events in the right order, see? And so you want to check your plot diagram and make sure that you got it right, okay? Pause the video on parts if you need to. So let's talk about the protagonist and antagonist, okay? So we know the protagonist is going to be the main character. So even though in this our main character is a bad guy, our protagonist is going to be the narrator, right? Even though he's a bad guy. And the narrator, antagonist is going to be anything that goes against the protagonist. So what's going against the narrator? We could say the old man. However, the old man's not really doing anything but being a part of the story. What's really fighting the narrator is his insanity, his madness. He's crazy. So really and truly the antagonist would be his own mind, his own insanity. And when we start talking about the symbolism, you guys are really going to understand it, okay? All right, let's talk about conflict a little bit. We definitely have a problem in the story. Now, is it an internal problem or an external problem? Is it something that's on the outside and we can see it, or is it on the inside? I'd say the biggest problem is going to be internal, and it's going to be the fact it's going to be person versus self, and the biggest problem is his insanity. Yeah, he had a problem with his eye and wanted to get rid of it, but really that's only because he was crazy. Okay, and then we have down here at the bottom the theme. Let's talk about the theme. So we've got the theme. We talked about that earlier on the other video when we were talking about the setting and the theme. I think it's a lesson that you can learn, that you can apply, or something like that. So we got the idea of reality versus madness, right? We got that craziness in there. And then we kind of have good versus evil too. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. So just make sure you got that written down, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in another video. So I hope you guys got this, and I hope you understood it. And the plot diagram is fairly easy to do. So we'll talk about that and go over that a little bit more later, okay? Love you. If you listen carefully, you can hear Lulu snoring. Did you wake up? I just woke up. Yes, Mama. All right, guys, the last part's going to be that think about it page, that last page. So we've got, and we're going to try to do this kind of quickly because I don't want y'all to watch our videos all day long, okay? So the first thing is asking, from what point of view is the telltale heart told? So all we got to do is look at the very first sentence of the text, and it says, true, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I have been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed them, not dulled them. So, and then it says, closer towards the end of that paragraph, how then am I mad? I again. Hearken, which means listen, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. So, we know the story is being told by someone inside of it, someone that experienced it. So our point of view is going to be first person. That's pretty easy, right? In what ways does the POV, point of view, affect the reader's response to the story? Well, let me ask you a question. The fact that this is happening and we're hearing everything in this story through the eyes of the murderer, you hear Lulu snoring? The eyes of the, I'm going to say killer because it fits. Through the eyes of the killer, a madman, right? We get to be inside the mind of a madman. We get to be in his head, inside his mind. So that changes the whole experience for us. If it had been an outside narrator saying, and then the butler went in the room and he did this and he did that, it would have been still a good story, but it wouldn't have been as interesting because we wouldn't have heard what was going on in his mind, all these thoughts he had about saying that he heard things in heaven and earth and heard many things in hell, or how he heard the death watches in the wall. And so, I can't wait to tell y'all what a death watch is. So a death watch is technically like these little bugs that climb up in the wall and they like eat it's kind of like termites, I guess, a little bit. Well, a long time ago, they used to believe that if you heard these bugs in the wall and they kind of just made a scratchy kind of noise or something, technically it was just their mating call. They were calling other bugs over to be like, bounce, chicka, wow, wow. But anyway, they used to believe that if you heard those in the wall, it meant death was coming for you. So we know now, because he was sitting there and he tells us that he heard the death watches in the wall, and he could, he says over here, if you look, let me see if I can get it in there. It says, he was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening, listening, hearkening to the death watches in the wall, right? And then it says his fears had been ever since growing upon him. And I know you can't see it right here. Let me move this. His fears had been growing ever since upon him. Let me see. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, la da 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 da. It was the mournful influence of the shadow that stalked him. He could feel my presence. Where is it that he says? I pitied him, he says. I can't find it. I know it's in here and I didn't write it down. I knew that, there it goes. Where am I at? I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I pitied the old man, although I chuckled to myself, la da 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 da. So we know that he's feeling sorry for the old man, and he knows how he feels because how he says night after night he sits in his bed thinking that death is coming for him. Death, death, death. He talks about death an awful lot. We're going to come back to that when we talk about symbolism, okay? So being inside his head lets us know how crazy he is. Can we trust him? Because he is so crazy. Can we trust what he's telling us? And the events that took place, can we trust that this is how it actually happened? When he's sitting there talking to those police, and he says they all believed him, and they were like, oh, I had them perfectly tricked, and we sat down and talked, and they believed everything I said. I was so calm and cool. How do we know that? We don't necessarily know that. That's inside his mind. They might have been sitting there thinking, get your gun. This guy is crazy. We don't know. All right. List several words or phrases that define the narrator's persona. Well, I'm just going to put one giant word. Crazy. He's also, I think, meticulous, which means detail-oriented. He makes sure everything is done perfectly. Ooh, we got that vocabulary word. He's stealthy, which means he's very graceful and calm, like a ninja when he sneaks into the room. He keeps telling us how calm and cool he is. However, he's screaming and jumping on this mat on this old man, so he's not as cool as he thinks he is, right? So I think we could definitely call him delusional and everything else. Okay, so let's look up here. Tone. Tone is the attitude an author conveys toward the subject or characters. The author's tone may be positive, inspiring, witty, cynical, etc. What is Edgar Allan Poe's tone in this story? Okay, is it inspiring or positive? Definitely not. It's not witty either. I would say the tone of this is mad. It's crazy. It's got an insane and a mysterious tone to it, right? All those words would help describe the tone. What helps set up that tone? Well, we've got he talks about death watches, and he talks about black shadows. All right, all those things, okay? And then he's hearing this heartbeat. And he says it's the old man's heartbeat. He says that his hearing is acute, which means it's sharp, it's good. He says so the disease, he's got some kind of disease, has made his hearing really good. So he says he can hear the old man's heartbeat. Now, y'all, can you hear somebody else's heartbeat? No, not unless you have a stethoscope. And we'll come back to that too and what that possibly means, okay? Then we have, published in January of 1843, Telltale Heart is considered Gothic fiction. All right, so what's some of the things that are Gothic fiction? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, Twilight. How many of you have watched Bella and Edward fall in love? It's got the horror, it's got the fear, but it also has the romance. If you've ever watched Dracula, that definitely is going to be Gothic. I know a lot of my girls love the Vampire Diaries, which I do too. That's going to be Gothic fiction, okay? All right. And now let's go to the personification, simile, alliteration, and repetition. I want to start off with the bottom, with the repetition. Hold on. My computer froze. I had to pull it back up for me to look at it. Okay, so if we start with the repetition, one thing he definitely repeats, we have the heartbeat repeating. He says that about The sound of a watch when enveloped in cotton, which is, if you've ever been laying and sleeping on your bed and you had a watch on, the old watches that used to tink, 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 not an Apple Watch, and you could hear it. That's what he kind of heard, was this ticking, okay? The sound of a watch enveloped in cotton. And he repeats the fact that he heard the heartbeat. He uses the word louder, 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 quicker, quicker, quicker. When he does that, it builds, it builds, it builds, it builds. It gives this suspense. It builds until you're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen, right? He gives personifications when you give something that's not human qualities. He talks about death. He says death, in approaching him, stalked his victim. Him had stalked with his black shadow, in approaching him, stalked with his black shadow. And so he's making death seem like it's alive, right? He's making it feel like it can move. It has a shadow. It has the physical ability to envelop something. Okay, we have a simile, so I opened it until at length. Similes when we use like or as, right? A single thin ray of light, like, we got our word like, the what? Thread of the spider. The thread of the spider. Why use that simile? Well, because a spider uses its web to trap its prey. So when he shone that light on that old man and it landed on his eye, guess what? He had trapped his prey, right? Trapped his prey, like a spider uses its web to trap its prey. All right, and then the last thing we can look at is some alliteration we see in there. It uses H a lot. It says hearken. Hearken, we got an H and a K. Alliterations when the sound gets repeated, right? And observe how healthily, right? How healthily. And then he says how calmly, ... because it keeps going. I can tell the whole story. That sound is what's getting repeated. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly. I could tell the whole story, right? And then it says his hideous heart. We got the H. His hideous heart. I hope y'all can see that, okay? All right, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more. It's so much better when we can have discussions together. I wish we could do Zoom meetings or something. But I hope you guys, I'm going to zoom in a little so you guys can see it good in case you couldn't. And you can get your answers, okay? All right, I will see y'all or talk to you later. Love you. Bye. Good night.